The cockpit of a P-51 Mustang at 32,000 feet is not a quiet place. The Packard-built Merlin engine, 1,200 horses of British engineering married to American mass production, creates a sound that pilots would later describe as a constant, aggressive purr. But on the morning of August 6, 1944, Major George Earl Preddy Jr. wasn't thinking about the sound. He was thinking about the headache. The night before had been a war bond rally. Champagne, speeches, the kind of mandatory celebration that comes when you're one of the rising aces of the 8th Air Force's 352nd Fighter Group. 23 years old, slight of build, with the kind of quiet intensity that made other pilots pay attention when he spoke. Preddy had earned his reputation in a P-47 Thunderbolt, but it was the Mustang, this silver machine with Cripes A, Mighty Third, painted on its nose that had turned him into something more than just another fighter jock. He was becoming, though he didn't know it yet, the deadliest P-51 pilot the war would ever see. But right now, at 8:40 in the morning over the German coast, nursing a hangover at altitude, Major George Preddy was about to compress more violence, more precision, and more lethality into the next 5 minutes than most pilots would experience in an entire tour. 6 enemy aircraft, 5.5 minutes, 1 pilot, 1 Mustang. The mathematics of aerial combat reduced to its purest, most brutal form. This is not a story about technology, though the P-51 was perhaps the finest fighter aircraft of the Second World War. This is not primarily a story about strategy, though the mission Preddy flew that morning was part of Operation Point Blank, the systematic destruction of the Luftwaffe's ability to contest Allied air superiority. This is a story about what happens when training, instinct, and a particular kind of cold-blooded competence collide at 400 miles per hour over enemy territory. It's about the 5 minutes that would define a man's legacy, earn him the Distinguished Service Cross, and establish a record that would stand for the remainder of the war. It's about the moment when everything, the months of training, the near-death experiences, the accumulated knowledge of how a Messerschmitt Bf 109 flies, when its pilot realizes he's being hunted, compressed into a time span shorter than it takes to make breakfast. And it's about what that compression cost, even in victory. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. To understand what happened over Hamburg that morning, you have to understand what the P-51 Mustang represented to the men who flew it. The aircraft that George Preddy strapped into that day was not the plane the U.S. Army Air Forces had wanted. It was almost an accident, a British specification, designed by North American Aviation in a rush, initially powered by an Allison engine that gave it excellent low-altitude performance but made it nearly useless above 15,000 feet. The British tried it anyway. They called it the Mustang, and they used it for ground attack and tactical reconnaissance, roles where its speed and range could compensate for its altitude limitations. Then someone history credits this to Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Hitchcock, an American attaché in London who had been a fighter pilot in the previous war, had an idea. What if you took the Mustang's sleek airframe, its revolutionary laminar flow wing that sliced through air with minimal drag, and married it to the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same power plant that made the Spitfire legendary, fitted with a 2-stage supercharger that could maintain power at 30,000 feet. The British tested it first, in late 1942. The performance was shocking. The Merlin Mustang could hit 440 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the Allison version at altitude. It had the range to fly to Berlin and back with external fuel tanks. It could outdive a few 190, turn inside a Bf 109, and when properly flown, hold its own against anything in the Luftwaffe's inventory. By early 1944, Merlin-powered P-51Bs were arriving in England in substantial numbers. The 352nd Fighter Group transitioned from P-47 Thunderbolts to Mustangs in April of 1944. Preddy, who had shot down his first enemy aircraft the previous December, a Bf 109 over Solingen, immediately recognized what he had in his hands. The P-47 was a robust, powerful machine, excellent for ground attack, capable of absorbing tremendous battle damage and getting you home. The P-51 was something else entirely. It was a thoroughbred, temperamental, demanding perfect technique, but in the hands of a skilled pilot, utterly lethal. The mission profile for August 6th was standard for the summer of 1944, bomber escort deep into Germany. The target was Hamburg, Germany's second-largest city, a major industrial centre and port. The bombers were B-17 Flying Fortresses, the heavyweights of the strategic bombing campaign. Hundreds of them would fly in staggered formations, each group a defensive box of guns, collectively capable of putting up a curtain of 50-caliber fire that could shred any fighter foolish enough to make a head-on pass. But the B-17 seconds guns had limited range. A Bf-109 could sit 3/4 of a mile out and fire 20mm cannons, picking bombers off one by one, beyond the reach of the bomber gunner's return fire. This was where the escort fighters came in. The P-51 seconds job was simple in concept, brutally complex in execution. Keep the German fighters away from the bombers. Ideally, destroy them before they even got close. By August of 1944, the tactical situation had shifted dramatically in the Allies' favour, largely because of a policy change made by General Jimmy Doolittle in February of that year. Before Doolittle took command of the 8th Air Force, fighter pilots were under strict orders to stay close to the bombers. If bounced by enemy fighters, they could engage defensively, but they were to return to close escort as soon as possible. Pursuit below 18,000 feet was forbidden. The doctrine was conservative, understandable given how valuable each bomber and its 10-man crew was, but it allowed skilled Luftwaffe pilots to choose their moments, strike, and escape. Doolittle changed the rules. His order was elegantly simple. Kill the Luftwaffe. Go find German fighters and destroy them on the ground, in the air, wherever they could be found. Escort the bombers, yes, but if you spot enemy aircraft, pursue and eliminate them. Don't let them escape to fight another day. The goal was not merely to protect this mission or that mission, but to systematically destroy Germany's ability to contest the skies. The effect was devastating for the Luftwaffe. By mid-1944, German fighter losses were approaching catastrophic levels. It wasn't that Germany lacked aircraft. Factories were still producing Bf-109 seconds and Fw-190 seconds in substantial numbers right up to the end of the war. What Germany lacked was experienced pilots. The Allied fighters were killing Luftwaffe pilots faster than the training pipeline could replace them. And, critically, the pilots they were killing were the veterans, the men with hundreds of hours of combat experience, the ones who knew how to lead a formation, how to judge deflection on a high-speed pass, how to survive when the odds turned against you. What remained in the summer of 1944 was increasingly a two-tier Luftwaffe, a shrinking cadre of highly skilled veterans with sometimes astonishing kill tallies, and a growing mass of barely trained replacements with perhaps 30 hours in type, thrown into combat against pilots like George Preddy, who had refined their skills over hundreds of hours and dozens of missions. This disparity between the hunter and the hunted would define what happened over Hamburg that morning. Preddy's flight took off from RAF Bodney in Norfolk, England, at approximately 0600 hours. The 352nd Fighter Group put up its standard complement of P-51 seconds, joining hundreds of other fighters from other groups, all converging on the bomber stream as it formed up over eastern England and headed across the North Sea toward Germany. The flight across the water was uneventful. Preddy, leading his element, would have been monitoring fuel consumption, checking the external drop tanks slung under his wings, scanning the sky for the telltale contrails that marked the bomber formations they were assigned to escort. The weather was clear, good for navigation, good for visibility, good for combat, if it came to that. As they crossed the German coast and turned southeast toward Hamburg, the drop tanks came off. You couldn't dogfight with external tanks, the drag was too severe, and they were vulnerable to damage. Pilots would jettison them when combat seemed imminent, or when ordered to do so by their flight leaders. With the tanks gone, the P-51 became what it was designed to be, a pure fighting machine, responsive, fast, deadly. The bombers reached the target area around 0830. Preddy's group was flying high cover, positioning above and ahead of the bomber formation, scanning for threats. The German fighters, when they came, would typically attack from altitude, diving through the formation in slashing passes or positioning ahead of the bombers and making head-on attacks where the closure rate was so fast that bomber gunners had only seconds to track and fire. The Bf 109 seconds appeared at approximately 0840, a formation of approximately 30 fighters, accompanied by another 30 flying top cover. The Germans were using classic tactics. The lower group would engage the bombers, while the upper group covered them against escort fighters. It was a sound plan, and against the pre-Doolittle rules of engagement, it might have worked. The German fighters would strike, and the American escorts would have to choose between chasing them or maintaining close formation with the bombers. But these weren't the old rules, and George Preddy saw an opportunity. The German formation hadn't spotted the P-51 seconds yet. They were focused on the bombers, positioning for their attack run. Preddy made his call perhaps on the radio, more likely with hand signals to his wingman, Lieutenant William T. Wisner, who had already proven himself in combat and would finish the war as an ace himself. The two P-51 seconds rolled into a diving attack from astern, coming out of the sun if possible, using altitude and speed to close the distance before the Germans realized they were under attack. What happened next would later be reconstructed from gun camera footage, Preddy's own after-action report, and the observations of other pilots in the formation. The precision of the account matters because what Preddy accomplished in the next 5.5 minutes was so extraordinary that some would later question whether it actually happened as described. It did. Preddy's first target was a Bf 109 on the left side of the German formation. The Messerschmitt was a good aircraft, faster than the Mustang in level flight at some altitudes, slightly more maneuverable in a turn, with excellent climb rate and altitude performance. But it had weaknesses. Its cockpit canopy framing obstructed visibility to the rear. Its fuel tanks were not self-sealing in many variants, and the cooling system was vulnerable to damage. And most critically, in August of 1944, it was increasingly likely to be flown by someone who had far less training and combat experience than an American pilot like Preddy. Preddy closed to perhaps 300 yards closer than many pilots would dare, because closing the range meant better hit probability, but also more danger if the enemy aircraft exploded or if you flew through the debris. His 6 Browning AN M250 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing, were harmonized to converge at a point in space ahead of the aircraft. When you pulled the trigger, all 6 guns would fire, pouring approximately 100 rounds per second into a cone of destruction. Preddy fired a burst. 2, perhaps 3 seconds. The gun camera, a 16mm film camera synchronized to roll when the guns fired, would have captured the tracer rounds walking into the Bf 109's fuselage and wing route. Strikes. Pieces flying off. White smoke coolant. Then black smoke fire. The Bf 109 rolled inverted and dove, its pilot either dead or attempting to escape. Preddy didn't follow. There were more targets, and the formation was beginning to react. The German pilots had spotted the P-51 seconds now. The formation broke, aircraft scattering as individual pilots took evasive action. This was the critical moment. Some American pilots, having scored a kill, would have been satisfied, would have pulled up and regrouped. Preddy pressed the attack. His second target was another Bf 109, this one breaking left, trying to turn inside the Mustang's radius. Bad move. The P-51 didn't turn as tightly as a 109 at low speed, but at high speed, and Preddy still had the energy from his initial dive, it could follow anything. Preddy tracked the 109 through the turn, led it appropriately for deflection, fired another burst, more strikes, more damage. Another aircraft spinning down trailing smoke. 2 down. Perhaps 90 seconds had elapsed. The discipline required to do what Preddy was doing cannot be overstated. He was flying at over 300 miles per hour, pulling multiple Gs in turns, processing information from instruments and from visual scanning, managing his ammunition supply, keeping track of friendly and enemy aircraft, all while making split-second decisions about which target to engage next. The mental workload was crushing. Pilots described combat as periods of intense focus, punctuated by moments where time seemed to slow, where you could see your tracers tracking toward a target, where you knew with absolute certainty whether your burst would connect or miss. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Preddy's third and fourth kills came as the German formation continued to break up. Individual aircraft were diving away, trying to escape. Some were turning to engage the P-51 seconds, attempting to at least disrupt the attack, even if they couldn't shoot down the Americans. Preddy pursued two Bf-109 seconds that were diving together, perhaps wingmen trying to cover each other. He closed on the leader first, fired, scored hits, watched the aircraft start burning, then shifted to the wingman, who was now turning hard, trying to get on Preddy's tail. The advantage was still with Preddy. He had altitude, speed, and position. Another burst, another kill. 4 aircraft down, perhaps 3.5 minutes had passed. The remaining German aircraft were scattering now, diving for the deck or running for cloud cover. Some were turning to engage, but the cohesion of their formation was shattered. Preddy's squadron mates were also engaged, turning the sky above Hamburg into a chaotic furball of American and German fighters. Preddy's fifth victim was a Bf-109 that was attempting to escape by diving. The Mustang's dive performance was excellent. It could exceed 460 miles per hour in a steep dive without structural failure, faster than almost any German fighter could safely manage. Preddy followed, closing the range as the 2 aircraft plummeted toward the lower altitudes. As they descended through 10,000 feet, then through 7, the air grew thicker, denser. The Merlin engine produced more power at lower altitudes. Preddy closed to point-blank range and fired. The Bf-109 exploded, possibly a fuel tank rupture, possibly an ammunition fire. There was no possibility of survival for the German pilot. 5 aircraft, perhaps 4.5 minutes. The 6th kill came at approximately 5,000 feet. By now, Preddy had to be managing his ammunition carefully. Each of his 6 guns held approximately 400 rounds. At the cyclic rate of fire, that was enough for perhaps 20 to 25 seconds of continuous firing, though combat bursts were typically 1 to 3 seconds. He'd fired multiple bursts. He had to be running low. The last Bf-109 was a straggler, separated from the formation, trying to escape to the east. Preddy pursued. Overtook it, the Mustang was faster in level flight and positioned himself astern. The German pilot must have seen him coming. The 109 attempted to turn, but Preddy had position and energy. He fired his last effective burst. The camera caught it. Strikes along the wing and fuselage, the aircraft rolling violently, then pointing down, trailing smoke and flame as it descended toward the German landscape below. 6 enemy aircraft destroyed. The entire engagement, from first contact to last kill, had lasted approximately 5.5 minutes. Some accounts say 6 minutes, some say even less. The precise timing is less important than the outcome. In the span of time it takes to soft-boil an egg, Major George Preddy had destroyed 6 enemy fighters, making him one of only 38 American pilots in the entire war to achieve ace in a day, status 5 or more kills in a single mission. And then came the hard part, getting home. Preddy's ammunition was nearly exhausted. His fuel was lower than ideal after the intense maneuvering. The sky was still full of German fighters, and his P-51, while intact, had been pushed hard. Any aircraft can have a mechanical failure at the worst possible moment, an engine that runs rough, a control surface that doesn't respond properly, a fuel line that develops a leak. Combat stress on the aircraft, combined with the accumulated fatigue of repeated missions, meant that every pilot who survived a fight then had to focus on survival in a different way, nursing a damaged or low-fuel aircraft back across hundreds of miles of enemy territory to reach England. Preddy made it back. The 352nd Fighter Group returned to RAF Bodny that afternoon, and when the gun camera film was developed and analysed, when the combat reports were filed and verified, The magnitude of what had happened became clear. Preddy had not just destroyed 6 enemy aircraft. He had destroyed 6 enemy aircraft in a single, sustained engagement, with textbook gunnery, without taking any significant damage to his own aircraft, and without losing his wingmen or exposing the bombers he was supposed to be protecting. His squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer, immediately nominated Preddy for the Medal of Honor, the highest American military decoration. The nomination would eventually be downgraded to the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award, but the recognition was instantaneous. On August 12th, just 6 days after the mission, Preddy was presented with the DSC in a ceremony at Bodney. The citation read, in part, "On this date, Major Preddy was leading a fighter group on a bomber escort mission against targets in the vicinity of Hamburg, Germany. As the bomber formation approached its objective, a flight of 30 enemy fighters with top cover support of an additional 30 fighters attempted to intercept the bombers. Major Preddy, with his wingmen, individually attacked the lower enemy flight, and in spite of its superiority in numbers and the danger of attack from the top cover, pressed home his attack with such skill and determination that he destroyed 6 enemy aircraft. The language is formal, bureaucratic even, but the recognition embedded in those words is significant. The citation explicitly notes that Preddy engaged a numerically superior force 30 aircraft, with top cover that could have bounced him at any moment. He pressed the attack with such skill and determination that he achieved a result that was statistically improbable to the point of being nearly impossible. After the ceremony, Preddy was granted a 30-day leave to the United States. It was standard practice for high-scoring aces, get them off the line, reduce the risk of losing them to a random flak burst or mechanical failure, use them for war bond rallies and recruitment. Preddy returned to Greensboro, North Carolina, where he was treated as the hero he had become. Parades, speeches, newspaper interviews. The local boy who had tried 3 times to join the Navy and been rejected for physical issues, who had worked in a cotton mill, who had attended Guilford College for 2 years before becoming a barnstormer pilot, was now one of the most famous American pilots of the war. But that fame came with a cost that wouldn't become fully apparent until December. When Preddy returned to England in late October of 1944, he was given command of the 328th Fighter Squadron within the 352nd Fighter Group. The 328th had a reputation problem. They were the lowest-scoring squadron in the group, struggling with morale and cohesion. Preddy's leadership was immediate and effective. He didn't give long motivational speeches. His first address to the squadron was brief. "We're here to shoot down the Hun." Under his command, the 328th became one of the most successful squadrons in the European theatre. On November 2, 1944, during a mission over Merseburg, Germany, Preddy personally shot down a Bf-109 using the new K-14 gyroscopic gun sight that had been installed in the P-51D models. The rest of his squadron shot down 24 enemy aircraft in that single mission, setting an 8th Air Force record. But the war was grinding toward its conclusion, and the Germans were increasingly desperate. In mid-December, they launched their last major offensive in the West, the operation that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The 352nd Fighter Group was moved forward to Airfield Y-29 near Asch, Belgium, to provide close air support for ground forces trying to contain the German breakthrough. On Christmas morning, 1944, Preddy led a formation of 10 P-51 Mustangs on patrol. They had been airborne for about 3 hours when ground control vectored them to assist in a dogfight already in progress. Preddy destroyed 2 Bf-109 seconds, his 26th and 27th confirmed kills before being directed to intercept a lone Focke-Wulf W-190 that was strafing Allied ground forces southeast of Liège, Belgium. Preddy pursued the Fu-190 at treetop height, with 2 other P-51 seconds following. They crossed the Allied front line, still in pursuit. Below them, an American anti-aircraft unit believed to be part of the 430th AA Battalion was tracking the German fighter. The gunners opened fire with 50 caliber machine guns, aiming at the FW-190. They missed the Tu-190. They hit all three P-51 seconds. Preddy's aircraft was struck multiple times. He managed to release his canopy, the first step in bailing out, but he was too low, travelling too fast. The P-51 hit the ground at high speed and at a shallow angle, which meant the crash might have been survivable, but Preddy's wounds from the .50 caliber fire were mortal. He was 25 years old. His final score, 26.83 aerial victories, making him the top-scoring P-51 pilot of World War II and the sixth highest-scoring American ace of the entire war. His younger brother, William Preddy, also a P-51 pilot with the 503rd Fighter Squadron, 339th Fighter Group, would be killed 4 months later, on April 17, 1945, when he was shot down by enemy anti-aircraft fire while strafing an airfield in what is today the Czech Republic. The two brothers are buried side by side at the Lorraine American Cemetery in France. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.